June 20th, 1944. A rain-soaked maintenance depot outside St. Lo, Normandy. Staff Sergeant Walter Riggs huddled beneath a canvas tent, carefully sketching modifications to a standard-issue Willys Jeep, while German artillery pounded the surrounding countryside. He was absolutely certain his commanding officer would approve his design by morning. A simple adaptation that would save countless American lives. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What Riggs could not possibly know was that his improvised solution would not only transform battlefield survivability for thousands of soldiers, but would ultimately challenge the fundamental approach to light vehicle protection across the entire European theater. The Allied invasion of Normandy had been underway for just 2 weeks. The beaches were secure, but the push inland had slowed to a bloody crawl. The hedgerow country of northern France, a landscape of small fields divided by ancient earthen berms topped with dense vegetation, had been transformed into a defensive nightmare. German forces had fortified these natural barriers, creating deadly firing positions that commanded every field and road. Allied armor struggled to penetrate the hedgerows, while infantry faced murderous fire whenever they attempted to advance. Captain James Hendricks of the 1st Infantry Division surveyed the mangled remains of what had once been a reconnaissance patrol. 3 jeeps had been ambushed less than 2 miles from the American lines, 7 men dead, 2 critically wounded. The lightweight quarter-ton vehicles, officially designated as the Willys MB, offered virtually no protection against enemy fire. Their canvas tops and open sides made them particularly vulnerable to the German MG-42 machine guns that seemed to be hidden behind every hedgerow. 4th Patrol hit this week, Lieutenant Frank Miller noted, crouching beside the bullet-riddled hood of the lead vehicle. "Command keeps sending them out, and they keep coming back in body bags." Hendricks nodded grimly. "Orders are orders. We need eyes forward, and the jeeps are all we've got for quick recon." Miller ran his fingers along the splintered dashboard, where dozens of rounds had penetrated the thin metal. "The Krauts are targeting the drivers first. They know it immobilizes the vehicle and traps the rest." "Clever bastards," Hendricks muttered, "and we just keep rolling out these death traps." The quarter-ton Willys Jeep had become the workhorse of the American Army. With more than 640,000 units produced during the war, it served every conceivable purpose, from ferrying officers and messages to evacuating wounded and pulling artillery pieces. Its rugged 4-wheel drive system and lightweight design made it ideal for navigating the difficult terrain of the European battlefield. But those same qualities, particularly its minimal weight, made armor protection seemingly impossible. Division command had been explicit. Reconnaissance must continue despite the losses. Intelligence about German positions was critical for planning the breakout from the Normandy beachhead. Without accurate information about enemy emplacements, the Allied advance would remain stalled, and more lives would be lost in failed frontal assaults. Back at the maintenance depot near St. Lo, Staff Sergeant Walter Riggs supervised a team of 15 mechanics responsible for keeping the division's fleet of vehicles operational. A former agricultural equipment repairman from Nebraska, Riggs had developed a reputation for creative problem-solving. When parts were unavailable, which was often, he fabricated replacements from whatever materials could be scrounged. His workshop was a chaotic collection of tools, spare parts, and salvaged components. That evening, as rain hammered the canvas roof of the maintenance tent, Private First Class Edward Simmons dragged a salvaged Jeep transmission into the workshop. The vehicle it had come from had hit a landmine that morning, killing all 4 occupants. "Anything worth saving?" Riggs asked, not looking up from the engine he was rebuilding. Simmons shook his head. "Not much. Engine blocks cracked, frames twisted. Pulled the transmission, but it's probably shot too." "What about the tires?" 3 were shredded by the blast. 4th one's intact, but the wheel rim is bent to hell. Riggs finally looked up, wiping greasy hands on a rag. "Bring it in anyway, rubber's getting scarce." An hour later, as Riggs inspected the salvaged tire, something caught his attention. The thick rubber had stopped several shrapnel fragments from the mine blast. They remained embedded in the tire's sidewall, having penetrated only partway through the dense material. Riggs turned the heavy tire in his hands, examining the embedded metal fragments. An idea began to take shape, one that seemed simultaneously obvious and absurd. "Hey, Simmons," he called, "how many spare tires do we have in inventory?" The private consulted a clipboard. 43, last count. More than we need since Supply finally sent that shipment last week. "And how many discarded tires in the scrap pile?" Simmons shrugged. "Dozens, maybe 100. Why?" Riggs didn't answer immediately. He was already sketching on the back of a maintenance report, calculating weights and measurements. The standard Jeep tire was 900 pounds per square inch, with a robust 4-ply construction. The rubber was thick enough to resist significant puncture force, perhaps enough to stop or slow a bullet. "Because," Riggs finally answered, "I think I might have figured out how to keep our boys from getting shot to pieces in those death traps." By midnight, Riggs had completed his design. He proposed cutting sections from discarded tires and mounting them inside the Jeep's body panels, creating a layer of rubber armor that might stop or at least slow enemy rounds. The material was readily available, required minimal modification to the vehicles, and added relatively little weight, crucial for maintaining the Jeep's performance characteristics. Captain Thomas Reynolds, the quartermaster officer responsible for the depot, was skeptical when Riggs presented his idea the following morning. "Rubber? As armor?" Reynolds examined the sketches with obvious doubt. "Sergeant, armor is made from steel, not tire rubber." "With respect, sir, we don't have steel to spare, and even if we did, it would make the Jeeps too heavy," Riggs argued. "The rubber won't stop everything, but it'll be better than nothing. I've seen what shrapnel does when it hits these tires, gets stuck instead of passing through." Reynolds handed the sketches back. "It sounds like desperation, Sergeant." "It is desperation. Sir, we're losing men every day because those Jeeps might as well be made of paper." After a long pause, Reynolds sighed. "Fine. Modify one vehicle as a prototype, but it comes out of your maintenance schedule. No additional resources." "Thank you, sir. We'll have it ready by tomorrow." Riggs and his team worked through the night. They selected a Jeep recently damaged by shrapnel, but with its engine and drivetrain intact. They salvaged 24 tires from the scrap heap, cutting away the sidewalls and treads to create flat panels of dense rubber. These they fitted inside the vehicle's body panels, doors and floor, securing them with bolts and metal straps. The modifications added approximately 170 pounds to the vehicle's weight, significant, but not enough to seriously impact performance. By dawn, the prototype was complete, its appearance virtually indistinguishable from a standard Jeep, except for slightly bulkier door panels and a reinforced floor. Major William Harrison, the division's operations officer, arrived to inspect the modification. He walked slowly around the vehicle, occasionally tapping the rubber-reinforced panels with his knuckles. "Doesn't look like much," he observed. "That's intentional, sir," Riggs explained. "From the outside, it looks like a standard Jeep. The Germans won't know to use heavier weapons against it." Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "How do we know it works?" "There's only one way to find out, sir. The test was conducted that afternoon in a cleared area behind the maintenance depot. The modified Jeep was positioned 50 yards from a firing position. Sandbags were placed in the driver's and passenger's seats to simulate occupants. Major Harrison, Captain Reynolds, and Sergeant Riggs observed from a sandbagged emplacement as a marksman opened fire with a captured German Mauser rifle. The first shots struck the driver's side door, punching through the outer metal skin, but visibly slowing as they encountered the rubber layer. Several rounds were stopped entirely, while others penetrated with significantly reduced velocity, lodging in the sandbags rather than passing completely through the vehicle, as they would have without the modification. Further tests with a Browning automatic rifle, which fired a more powerful cartridge, showed that the rubber armor could not stop these heavier rounds, but still reduced their velocity enough that a soldier might survive a hit that would otherwise have been fatal. Major Harrison was impressed enough to authorize the modification of 10 additional Jeeps for field testing under combat conditions. Riggs and his team worked around the clock for the next 3 days, converting the vehicles according to his design. They refined the process with each installation, developing shortcuts and improvements that made the modifications more effective and easier to implement. On June 25th, the first combat-modified Jeeps were assigned to reconnaissance teams from the 1st Infantry Division. Captain James Hendricks would lead the initial patrol, taking 2 of the modified vehicles into territory where previous recon teams had been ambushed. The night before the patrol, Hendricks visited the maintenance depot to inspect the vehicles personally. He found Riggs still working, making final adjustments to the rubber panels. "You really think this will make a difference?" Hendricks asked, skepticism evident in his voice. Riggs straightened up, wiping sweat from his forehead. "It won't make them invulnerable, Captain. But it might give your men a fighting chance if you take fire." Hendricks ran his hand along the reinforced door panel. "The men are calling them rubber ducks." "As long as they don't start thinking they're bulletproof," Riggs cautioned. "This is just buying time, enough to return fire or get out of the kill zone." The captain nodded. "Better than nothing. And right now, nothing is exactly what we've got." At 0600 hours the following morning, Hendricks led his patrol out from the American lines. Each of the 2 modified jeeps carried 4 men, a driver, a radio man, and 2 scouts armed with M1 Garand rifles. They moved cautiously through the hedgerow country, using the natural cover to conceal their advance as much as possible. 3 miles into German-held territory, as the lead jeep rounded a bend in a narrow country lane, the distinctive chatter of an MG-42 machine gun shattered the morning quiet. Rounds impacted the vehicle's hood and windshield, shattering the glass, but losing momentum in the rubber panels behind it. "Contact front," shouted the driver, Corporal Michael Davis, as he accelerated through the ambush. The jeep lurched as bullets continued to strike it, but incredibly none of the occupants were hit. Davis drove 50 yards before swerving behind the cover of a stone farmhouse. The second jeep, following 20 yards behind, had time to react. Its driver reversed out of the kill zone while the scouts returned fire, forcing the German gunner to duck down momentarily. From the shelter of the farmhouse, Hendricks assessed their situation. The lead jeep had taken at least 30 rounds, primarily to its front end and driver's side. The windshield was gone, and the hood was punctured in multiple places, but the engine still ran. More importantly, none of his men had been wounded. "Radio command," Hendricks ordered. "Tell them we've identified a machine gun nest at coordinates Echo 59er, and tell them the rubber armor works." That initial success transformed Sergeant Riggs from an eccentric problem solver to a division celebrity overnight. Division Command ordered the immediate modification of all reconnaissance jeeps, with priority given to vehicles assigned to forward observer teams and messenger services, the jeeps most likely to encounter enemy fire. Riggs's workshop expanded, taking over an abandoned barn where multiple modification teams could work simultaneously. Mechanics from other units were temporarily assigned to the project, and a systematic effort began to collect discarded tires from across the beachhead. Even damaged tires could provide usable sections of rubber, and every Allied unit seemed to have a collection of them. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Thompson, the division's logistics officer, visited the workshop on the 3rd day of expanded operations. By then, Riggs and his teams had modified 37 jeeps and developed a standardized procedure that allowed them to complete each vehicle in under 4 hours. "Impressive operation you've got here, Sergeant," Thompson remarked, watching as teams cut, shaped, and installed the rubber panels with assembly line efficiency. "Thank you, sir. We're learning as we go." Thompson consulted a clipboard. "I have reports from 3 separate patrols crediting your modifications with saving lives. One jeep took 57 counted impacts and still made it back to our lines." "Were there casualties, sir?" "2 wounded, no fatalities. Before your modifications, that would have been 8 dead." Riggs nodded, satisfaction evident in his tired face. "We're working on improvements. Double layering the rubber in critical areas, finding the best configuration." Thompson looked up from his clipboard. "I've been authorized to allocate additional resources. What do you need?" "More hands, more space, and every tire you can find me, sir." By early July, the Riggs modification, as it had come to be known, had spread beyond the 1st Infantry Division. Officers from other units visited the workshop, bringing their own mechanics to learn the technique. The simple, effective nature of the modification, using readily available materials to solve an immediate battlefield problem, appealed to the practical nature of frontline commanders. Across the Normandy beachhead, maintenance units began implementing their own versions of the rubber armor. sometimes with variations based on local conditions and available materials. Some units experimented with layering the rubber with salvaged steel plates from damaged vehicles, creating a composite armor that was even more effective, though heavier. The most significant validation came during Operation Cobra, the major American offensive launched on July 25th to finally break out of the Normandy beachhead. As part of the advance, modified jeeps carried forward observers ahead of the main assault, allowing them to direct artillery fire with unprecedented accuracy and survive exposure to enemy positions. Captain Williams of the 4th Infantry Division later wrote in his after-action report, "The rubber-armored jeeps allowed our artillery spotters to maintain position despite direct fire from enemy machine guns. 3 vehicles took significant hits but remained operational throughout the mission, resulting in devastating accurate fire on German positions that would otherwise have gone untargeted." Not every encounter ended successfully. The rubber armor had significant limitations. It could be penetrated by heavy machine gun fire at close range and offered no protection against artillery fragments or direct hits from anti-tank weapons. Several modified jeeps were lost during the breakout, along with their crews. Sergeant Anthony Miller, a driver with the 2nd Armored Division, survived one such attack. His rubber-modified jeep was struck by concentrated fire from 2 German machine gun positions while evacuating wounded from a forward aid station. "The rubber bought us time," Miller later testified. "Without it, we'd have been dead in the first seconds. As it was, we had nearly 30 seconds of protection, enough to return fire and identify an escape route." Miller's vehicle took 78 counted impacts before a round finally penetrated the armor and wounded him in the shoulder. By then, the jeep had traveled nearly 200 yards from the ambush site, far enough for the wounded men to take cover in a drainage ditch. All survived. As the Allied armies broke out of Normandy and began their advance across France, the demand for rubber-armored jeeps grew exponentially. The ad hoc nature of the modification, initially implemented by individual mechanics using salvaged materials, evolved into a more systematic program. Ordnance officers began requisitioning new tires specifically for armor conversion, and maintenance companies established dedicated modification teams. Back in England, officials at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, SHAEF, took notice of the field modification's success. General Omar Bradley requested a formal evaluation of the Riggs modification, leading to the establishment of a testing program at an ordnance depot near Portsmouth. The results were compelling enough that in August, an official technical bulletin was issued to all Allied units, standardizing the installation procedure and authorizing the allocation of resources for widespread implementation. What had begun as one sergeant's desperate improvisation was now official doctrine. Sergeant Walter Riggs, meanwhile, had been promoted to technical sergeant and given command of a specialized vehicle modification unit. His team now numbered over 50 mechanics, working in shifts to modify not only jeeps, but also applying the rubber armor concept to ambulances, command cars, and other vulnerable vehicles. By late August, Riggs's reputation had spread far enough that correspondents from Stars and Stripes, the American military newspaper, arrived to interview him. The resulting article, titled "Nebraska Mechanic Saves Lives with Rubber Armor," brought his innovation to the attention of the American public. The article caught the eye of executives at the Willys Overland Motors Company, the primary manufacturer of the Jeep. Engineers at the company's Toledo, Ohio plant began studying the field modification to determine if aspects could be incorporated into production vehicles. The challenge was significant. Manufacturing schedules were tight, and any change to the production process risked delaying the delivery of vital vehicles to the front. Harvey Williams, chief production engineer at Willys Overland, recognized both the value of the modification and the challenges of implementing it on the production line. "The Riggs modification is brilliant in its simplicity," Williams wrote in a memo to company executives. "It represents exactly the kind of field expedient solution that makes American forces adaptable. However, incorporating rubber armor into our production process would require significant retooling and would reduce our output by an estimated 15% at a time when the military is demanding increased production." After considerable debate, Willys Overland decided against modifying the production line. Instead, the company developed an official field modification kit that could be shipped to maintenance units for installation on vehicles already in service. The kit standardized the components and included detailed instructions, reducing the time required for installation and ensuring consistent quality. By September 1944, as Allied forces approached the German border, the rubber armor modification had been implemented on thousands of jeeps across the European theater. What began as a desperate improvisation had evolved into a standard feature of frontline vehicles. The impact on operations was significant. Casualty rates among reconnaissance teams, forward observers, and messenger services decreased by an estimated 47%, according to a Ninth Army analysis. The ability of these units to operate effectively, even when exposed to enemy fire, improved the flow of information to command posts and enhanced battlefield awareness. Captain James Hendricks, whose reconnaissance team had first tested the modification in combat, wrote to Riggs from a field hospital in Belgium, where he was recovering from wounds received during the fighting around Aachen. "Your rubber ducks have transformed our capabilities," Hendricks wrote. "Before, recon was essentially a suicide mission. Now we can actually complete our objectives and return with the intelligence command needs. The men call the modified jeeps their life insurance policies. You've saved more lives than any medic in this division." The German forces, initially confused by the unexpected resilience of American light vehicles, eventually identified the modification. By October, intelligence officers reported that German units were adapting their tactics, using heavier weapons against jeeps and targeting wheels and engines rather than occupants. This tactical shift itself represented a form of victory, forcing the enemy to expend more substantial resources against targets that had previously been easily neutralized with small arms fire. Every Panzerfaust or heavier machine gun devoted to attacking jeeps was unavailable for use against tanks or infantry. As winter approached and combat shifted to the densely forested Ardennes region, the rubber armor faced new challenges. Extreme cold caused the rubber to become brittle, reducing its effectiveness. Maintenance units adapted by developing removable panels that could be taken inside and warmed before missions, and by applying winterization compounds originally designed for tire treatment. During the Battle of the Bulge, when German forces launched their last major offensive in December 1944, the rubber-armored jeeps proved crucial for maintaining communications between isolated American units. When radio communications failed due to terrain or weather, messengers in modified vehicles delivered critical orders and intelligence through areas of uncertain control. Private First Class Robert Thompson, a messenger with the 28th Infantry Division, drove his rubber-armored jeep through 15 miles of contested territory during the early hours of the German offensive, delivering vital intelligence about the scale of the attack to division headquarters. "We took fire 3 separate times," Thompson later recalled. "The rubber armor was hit at least 20 times, but I made it through. Without Sergeant Riggs's modification, that message would never have arrived, and our division might have been completely overwhelmed." The success of the rubber armor concept soon extended beyond jeeps. By early 1945, as Allied forces pushed into Germany itself, the principle had been applied to a wide range of vehicles. Ambulances received particular attention, with extensive rubber protection installed around patient compartments. Command vehicles used by senior officers incorporated the armor, as did the specialized radio cars that maintained communications between headquarters. Technical Sergeant Walter Riggs received the Bronze Star in February 1945 for his contribution to the war effort. The citation read, in part, "Through innovative use of available materials, Technical Sergeant Riggs developed a field modification that significantly reduced casualties among reconnaissance and communications personnel, enhancing operational capabilities across the European theater. His initiative, technical skill, and devotion to the welfare of his fellow soldiers exemplify the highest traditions of the United States Army." After the ceremony, a colonel from Ordnance Research and Development interviewed Riggs about the development process. "What made you think of using tire rubber as armor?" the colonel asked. Riggs considered the question. "Necessity, sir. We had men dying, we had no steel to spare. but we had plenty of discarded tires. Sometimes the best solution is whatever's at hand. As the war in Europe drew to a close in the spring of 1945, the legacy of the rubber armor modification was secured. Ordnance experts estimated that the innovation had saved between 800 and 1,000 American lives and had significantly enhanced operational capabilities at a critical phase of the campaign. More broadly, the success of the Riggs modification influenced post-war vehicle design philosophy. The concept that armor need not always be steel, that alternative, lighter materials could provide meaningful protection, would eventually contribute to the development of composite and ceramic armor technologies in the decades following the war. In the immediate aftermath of victory in Europe, the U.S. Army conducted a comprehensive assessment of field modifications that had proven effective during combat. The rubber armor ranked among the most significant innovations, not only for its direct impact on survival rates, but also for how it demonstrated the value of empowering frontline personnel to develop solutions to battlefield problems. The official report noted, "The development and implementation of the rubber armor modification exemplifies the American approach to warfare. Practical problem solving at the lowest level, using available resources to overcome immediate challenges. This decentralized innovation capability represents a significant advantage over more rigidly structured military organizations." For the thousands of soldiers who rode in rubber-armored jeeps during the campaign in Northwest Europe, the modification represented something more personal, a tangible expression that someone cared about their survival, that their lives were worth the effort of improvisation and adaptation. Lieutenant Frank Miller, who had observed the aftermath of the ambushed reconnaissance patrol that inspired Riggs's innovation, commanded a rubber-armored jeep during the final advance into Germany. After a firefight near the Elbe River, in which his vehicle was struck multiple times without casualties, he gathered his men around the bullet-pocked door panel. "See those rounds?" he said, pointing to where German bullets had embedded themselves in the thick rubber. "Each one of those would have been in one of us. Remember that the next time some rear echelon officer tells you nobody back there cares about the guys at the front." After Germany's surrender in May 1945, Technical Sergeant Walter Riggs was offered a commission as a second lieutenant in the Ordnance Corps, with a post-war assignment to research and development. He declined, preferring to return to Nebraska and his pre-war occupation as an agricultural equipment repairman. "I'm just a mechanic who saw a problem that needed fixing," he told a Stars and Stripes reporter during a follow-up interview. "There are thousands of guys like me all across the front. The difference is I got lucky. My crazy idea actually worked." Riggs returned home in July 1945, one of millions of American servicemen transitioning back to civilian life. He opened a farm equipment repair shop in Grand Island, Nebraska, eventually expanding into sales of tractors and combines. He rarely spoke about his wartime innovation, uncomfortable with being singled out for recognition when so many others had made similar contributions that went unacknowledged. The rubber armor modification received little attention in initial histories of the war, overshadowed by more dramatic technological developments like radar, proximity fuses, and nuclear weapons. Yet for the veterans who had relied on it for survival, its significance remained profound. At a reunion of the 1st Infantry Division in 1965, a group of former reconnaissance team members located Riggs and invited him to attend as their honored guest. Initially reluctant, he eventually agreed, traveling to Chicago for the event. There, surrounded by men whose lives his innovation had helped to save, Riggs finally began to appreciate the full impact of his contribution. Former Captain James Hendricks, by then a successful insurance executive, presented him with a shadow box containing bullet-riddled sections of rubber armor salvaged from his original test vehicle. "You gave us a chance when we had none," Hendricks said during the presentation. "Every man in this room who served in a recon team came home because of what you did with those discarded tires. Some innovations win wars. Yours saved the men who fought them." The legacy of the rubber armor modification extended far beyond World War II. The concept that effective protection could be achieved through creative use of non-traditional materials influenced vehicle design in later conflicts, particularly in Vietnam, where helicopters and transport vehicles faced similar vulnerabilities to small arms fire. More fundamentally, the story of Walter Riggs and his rubber ducks became part of the larger narrative about American ingenuity and adaptability in warfare. The image of a small-town mechanic developing a life-saving innovation from discarded materials embodied the democratic nature of American military problem-solving, the belief that good ideas could come from anywhere in the ranks. In 1972, as part of a comprehensive oral history project on World War II innovations, researchers from the U.S. Army Center of Military History interviewed Riggs at his home in Nebraska. By then 70 years old and retired, he had maintained his modesty about his contribution. "We just did what needed doing," he told the interviewers. "That's all. The real story isn't about me or rubber tires. It's about a system that allowed a sergeant to try something that sounded crazy, because men were dying and something had to change." When asked what lesson future military planners should take from his experience, Riggs thought carefully before answering. "Trust the men at the front to understand their problems better than anyone else," he said, "and give them the freedom to solve those problems, even if the solutions don't look like anything in the manual. The manual can't anticipate everything they'll face." Walter Riggs passed away in 1978, having lived to see his innovation incorporated into military technical manuals and taught at ordnance schools as an example of field-expedient problem-solving. His obituary in the Grand Island Independent mentioned his Bronze Star and his wartime invention, but devoted more space to his contributions to the local community. His 40 years as a volunteer firefighter, his leadership in the County Agricultural Association, and his mentorship of dozens of young mechanics. Perhaps that balance would have pleased him. Throughout his life, he maintained that his wartime contribution was simply an extension of the problem-solving approach he applied to all challenges, whether fixing a broken tractor or finding a way to protect soldiers from enemy fire. The rubber armored jeeps of World War II have largely disappeared now, either scrapped after the war or restored to original specifications by collectors who often know nothing of the life-saving modification once applied to similar vehicles. A few examples remain in military museums, with placards explaining their significance, but they are rare. Yet the principle that Riggs discovered, that sometimes the most effective solutions arise from creative use of available materials rather than elaborate new technologies, remains relevant in military planning. Modern combat vehicles incorporate sophisticated composite armors that owe a conceptual debt to those first rubber panels, cut from discarded tires in a muddy Normandy maintenance depot. And somewhere in the vast archives of the United States Army, a faded technical bulletin still exists, outlining the standardized procedure for applying the Riggs modification to quarter-ton vehicles. It stands as a testament to one mechanic's refusal to accept that nothing could be done to protect the men riding into battle in vulnerable jeeps, and to the lives saved by his determination to prove otherwise. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.